The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 20th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless, then the second, and the third married her. And so the same way all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God, not of the dead, but of the living. For to him all of them are alive. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Grace, mercy, and peace be with you from God our Father and our risen Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. So let's talk about neural pathways, shall we? Now I'm going to do my best to boil down about a 45-minute conversation into just a few so that you get the crux of it so we can move on to the God thing. Our brains are amazing, and they work on a very efficient level. Our brains actually strive to be the most efficient thing that we have. So when we have a thought or we do an action, our brain patterns that out. And when we do it again, our brain begins to create a path. And the more we have a thought, or the more we do a thing, our very efficient brain creates a neural pathway. So that when we begin to do that thing or have that thought, our brain easily slips into it. And the more we do this action or have this thought, the bigger the pathway gets. Until some things become a neural superhighway. So the more we think about something, the more we do something, the bigger the pathway gets. And since the brain wants to be super efficient, it will force that pathway once it realizes that's the direction it is going. All out of efficiency. Have you ever gotten in the car and drove home and pull into the driveway and go, how did I get here? Yeah. That's your brain on that neural superhighway. Or you think to yourself, you know what, I'm going to leave work, or I'm going to leave school, or I'm going to leave church, and I need to stop at Buckeye and get some cheese for dinner, and then you get home and go, why didn't I stop and get cheese? Because your brain goes right into that neural superhighway. Now, for a lot of things, this is great. Things like breathing. We don't even think about breathing. But even brushing our teeth or working buttons. You know, with the impending release of the Fred Rogers movie, and growing up in Pittsburgh, growing up on Mr. Rogers, I got to saw 2 videos of the first time he sang Won't You Be My Neighbor and the last time he sang Won't You Be My Neighbor. And both times, here's Fred Rogers singing away in front of the camera, and he changes his sweater. And he's like doing the buttons while he's singing. He's not looking at the buttons, he's just doing them. That's a neural superhighway. When we do things without thinking. Look, if I started the Lord's Prayer right now, would you need to look in the book to go with me? No. I remember sitting with an Alzheimer's patient up at the VA hospital in Brexford years ago. Didn't remember his name, didn't remember his wife. We started the Lord's Prayer, boom, spot on, right there. That's a neural superhighway. And these can be great until change needs to happen. No, I know, throwing that word out here, I mean, that's almost like a curse word. I get it. And look, here's the thing. No one likes change. No one likes change. Because the brain does not like change. Because change requires energy. Change requires forming a new pathway. And the brain, wanting to be efficient, repels change because change takes energy. Those who are better at change are those who have worked to create more shallow pathways of experience and are willing to expend the energy to change. An example of that would be going from home to work. You drive a different way each day. So you don't have that one way to go, but you have 6 or 7. Therefore, you're creating different pathways in your brain. The brain doesn't like to expend energy. So the bigger the neural pathway, the harder it is to exit that pathway and start another. Now, I bring this up because these pathways impact how we walk with, talk about, look at, and experience God. And here's really where I want to go with this. For these pathways, which our brain desires us to be efficient, they ultimately become the boundary to which God is encapsulated. Our God is only as big, only as creative, only as powerful as our neural pathways allow our God to be. The impact our God has on our lives is relative to the level of divergence our brain will allow from the pathways we have created. Are you with me? Are you staying with me here? I know this is kind of like really big stuff. I wish Dr. Daniel Amen was here today to talk about this. He's much better at it than I am. But he's much more loquacious than I am. Our brain will allow us to have an impact from God only relative to the level of our divergence from the pathways we have created. I'm going to throw an example out here. I talked about the Lord's Prayer a minute ago. All right? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We can just keep going. Last time, before this setting changed, we were doing now the feast and celebration. And in the book, it uses the more contemporary version of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done. How many of you had to look at the book in order to go there? How many of you are uncomfortable because you had to look at the book in order to go there? I'm seeing your faces. See? Now, if we truly wanted to get into the true understanding of the Lord's Prayer, we'd be doing it in Aramaic. But we weren't trained in Aramaic. This is how our neural pathways can affect the size of our God. Imagine heaven, if you will. This is where the Sadducees go. Now, the Sadducees in our text today, they really didn't believe in heaven to begin with. So this is kind of like a riddle that they're throwing out there to Jesus to try to trick him up. But imagine resurrection through. Imagine what resurrection will look like. Imagine it. If honesty is given, it will look very similar to the experiences we already have. Because that's how our brains work. When we think about heaven, when we think about the bigness of God is confined to our neural pathway. These leaders come to Jesus with centuries of historical pathways created, going all the way back to Moses. This isn't just a neural pathway, this is a neural Grand Canyon, and they are caught in this rut. They have the Lord of life, the dreamer of dreams, the creator of worlds, the giver of life, standing before them, proven time and time again that he has the power to wield creation. And all they can do is throw in this riddle about who will marry whom in heaven. For these Sadducees, there is no room for them to contemplate God doing anything different, doing anything so unimaginable, that God could do something so incredible with the world to come. Heaven, afterlife, eternity. Well, it's just going to be like this. We do our thing, we're dead, we're done, that's it. That was the Sadducees' thinking. They could not perceive a God who would cleanse, renew, resurrect, and create this perfection that we come to understand as heaven. And they sat at the top of the heap. So they didn't need God to interact in their lives. They had all that they wanted. They had money, power, clothing, food, house. They had it all. This was as good as it was going to get. So for them, there was no room for God to do anything different. God was boiled down to what they wanted. Well, my friends, it's easy for us to fall into that same trap. In ourselves, in our community, in our spirit, in our lives. That God can become limited to our thinking or our experience, our pathways of comfort and expectation, and in turn, anything outside of our experience is abandoned or looked at as less than, or looked at as impossible. I've told you many stories about my time in Philadelphia. This is actually a good one. Okay? I told you many tough ones. This is actually a good one. At one point in time, when I had more hair up here, I did actually at one point have more hair, there was a cross of hair on the back of my head. Okay? So my barber, some of you may remember this, my barber, my stylist, she would shave a cross on the back of my head. So I was in this program called Redevelopment, and the church was changing, so I was asked, this other church was going in this program of redevelopment, and the assistant to the bishop was explaining it, and some of the things that God was doing. She was explaining me as one of the redevelopment pastors. And one of the guys said, you know what? I would never, and as soon as you're about ready to pull out the word never, you probably want to take a breath. I would never go to a church or allow my church to have a pastor with a cross on the back of his head. That's what he said. He said. I didn't know this until later. Sorry. Well, lo and behold, I happen to be the pastor that was asked to oversee that church in its transition. We had a great relationship because he was willing to diverge from his never to experience what God can do. Come on, it's just hair up the end of the world. You see, when we push God into our boundaries, our God becomes very small. But we do not have a God who is limited. We do not have a God who works within our boundaries. We do not have a God who's going to jump on our neural super pathways and say, okay, let's go for a ride. We have a God who is not contained by any boundaries. And a God who is not contained by any boundaries can place us in areas of extreme anxiety. But it can also place us in areas of extreme potential. This is where Paul talks about that idea of the renewing of the mind. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind. Go to God and seek that those pathways that have been created get filled in, and new pathways with God's mission and work are created. When we limit God to our thinking, our experience, our efficiency, then God becomes the one who is small. And we become the boss, and God becomes the servant. This is not the order that God desires for us. And so God calls us constantly to examine our thinking, to examine our behavior, to examine our words, to examine our patterns, to examine them and ensure that our thinking and our pathways are not standing in front of God. Even if we find great discomfort in them. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. One more thing. For centuries, millennia, The thought was, dead is dead, you're done, that's it, it's over. That pathway was blown up on Easter Sunday morning, when Jesus walks out of the tomb and says, here I am, dead, but alive. Now we can start thinking differently. Now this world is not confined to the power of death. God took the old pathway and eradicated it. He said we're doing something new. And that new contains resurrection. For that, we cry out, thanks be